Hey everybody, it's Captain CA from FlatsClass YouTube. Today, I'm going to teach you how to catch some of these right here. That's right, shallow water cobia. You're going to learn the time of year, the tackle necessary, and the approach. So, walk with me down to the shop and let's talk about this. This episode of FlatsClass YouTube is brought to you by AquaTraction, your go-to solution for advanced marine flooring. All right, let's talk about an overview of how to target these shallow water cobia right here, okay? All right, let's talk about the time of year. The best time of year, honestly, for me on the West Coast is going to be any time from, let's just say, early March, depending upon how far south you are, all the way till almost Memorial Day, which is at the end of May. And I'm talking about the zone from Marco Island all the way up through the panhandle of Florida. Now, the best opportunity, and we've done a video on redfish with this, is catching them off the backs of rays. But there's also the opportunity with catching them around manatees, catching them around bigger sharks, especially bull sharks in the shallows. But because I'm a skiff guide and I'm in a small boat all the time, I'm going to tell you that I'm targeting these rays and these cobia in their relationship in anywhere from 2 foot of water all the way up to about 6 foot of water, depending on water clarity. Now, naturally, I think it's best to target them on these flats that have more sand than grass because it's a lot easier to pick them up and see them from a greater distance. Like we did the video a couple of weeks ago with redfish on mudding rays, a lot of that stuff was inside islands and passes and barrier places where they're a little shallower, little easier to target. I'm talking about the outside flats, well outside, well off the bank. That's the zone where the big rays, the spotted eagle rays are, the manta rays are on the beaches. And even the bigger southern stingrays, I mean the ones that look like they're half of a car hood or the size of a car door. Those are the types of rays that the cobia like to tag along with, if you will. Many of the shallow water cobia that I target are going to be in that, I'm going to say, 30-inch class all the way up to about 4 foot in the shallow water. But you got to be prepared for that. Not only do you have to see the ray and be able to make an approach, because these fish typically, if you're going to see them in a little bit deeper water, 2 to 6 feet, they're going to feel you if you're driving your boat up on top of them. Now, the cobia are super fixed on those rays. They want to eat something. And primarily their diet is crabs, pinfish, eels, things like that. They're fish of opportunity when they're in this scenario. So I'm going to share with you a couple of lures and a rod and reel setup that I always use this time of year, spring and late spring, before we get into summer and I start tarpon fishing. So I'm going to get that ready next, and I'll be right back. You could use a variety of artificials or even flies, larger flies, if you can approach these fish, because they're moving quickly, especially if they're on eagle rays or manta rays. They're moving a little bit faster. They're not as slow. So you've got to kind of keep up with them, whether that's on your trolling motor or you try to pick an angle where you can get around and let them come by to you. Lots of guys like to find a groove where they're in or a zone where they're in and just kind of stake out on an outside flat. And then when they see a ray from a distance, whether they know there's a cobia on it or not, they just start pushing at an angle where they can kind of cut that ray off and be able to make a nice long cast. Remember, you're targeting the flats that generally, or the sandbars that generally have a lighter bottom with just kind of very little patches of grass, so it's a lot easier to see these fish. And the higher you can put your eyes above the water, with Smith optics hopefully, you'll be able to ascertain whether the cobia is right on the ray, which oftentimes they are. Sometimes if it's a bigger ray and it's a little deeper water, they're underneath the ray, under one of the wings. And in many cases, when I'm pushing my skiff around, I see them, sometimes 5 and 6 feet behind the ray, because the ray's mudding around and then moving quickly and just covering water. And they're kind of like circling around the ray and then coming back and getting on one side of them. It's usually the side where when they lift their wings up, the dust kind of comes out from underneath it, and they want to be on that down current side and then snark up a bait. Probably the best bait that has worked for me since last spring has been the 6-inch darters. This is a Z-Man bait, so very stretchy, lots of action. You can see how much action. If you look real close, you can see how the body is actually segmented there. So the tail has tons of action. Now, because I'm going to share with you in a few minutes the rod and reel combo that I like to use for this, you generally have to use a little heavier head, because I'm throwing this stuff on medium heavy tackle. Because you have no idea if you're going to catch a 2-foot cobia or if you're going to catch a 4-foot cobia. But be prepared for the 4-foot cobia. So generally I have a larger jig head or rigging hook setup for this, and I've got a combo that I'm going to show you with the next bait. The next bait, sometimes I use the full-size goat, and then sometimes I use these turbo craws that look like crabs. Remember how I told you pinfish, probably eels like the darters, crabs, anything that looks like that, they jump on. They'll jump on it in 2 seconds because that's what they're expecting to see out from underneath the ray. So I'll use this little turbo colored Z-Man turbo craws, and I rig it on a 1/4 ounce. This is a 1/4 ounce snake locks rigging hook. That way, I'm careful not to hook the ray, because lots of times you feel that wing come down, it taps that bait, and you're coming tight, and now you're hooked up to something that you don't want to be hooked up to, and it's going to probably just spool you if you don't break it off quick enough. This little snake locks weight forward presentation, you can use the Texas eye as well, but it's heavy. It goes through the water on a long cast very well, and lots of times these fish are moving on these rays, and I don't have the luxury of being able to pull close enough like I do on the mudding rays with the redfish, where there's plenty of time to figure out where they are and throw. This is usually a long cast where you're trying to make a golf shot, if you will, out in front of them and time it so it comes right behind the ray and the cobia sees it and attacks it and never feels your boat or where your cast goes. So I like weight forward, heavier baits to do this. So this is a great tool here. These 2 soft baits, the eel and the crab look. And if you want to throw a larger paddle tail, like a 4 or 5-inch paddle tail, like the Diesel Minnow series, that would work equally as well. And then lastly, something that you don't think, and a couple of years ago we did an actual show with Lisa Fitzgerald on this, I use these bigger Mirrolures, especially the skin series that looks just like a pinfish. I will throw it right on top of the ray, twitch it twice, it kind of hangs there, and as the ray goes underneath it, there's the cobia's mouth, and he sees it and he hammers it, and these got meaty enough hooks on them where I can hang in there with a big cobia for quite some time and get them next to the boat. Now, I'm gonna bring you over and we're gonna go look at this rod and reel setup next. All right, I just finished rigging this rod because I'm actually going cobia fishing tomorrow. We may even do some filming for FlatsClass television doing this stuff. So rod of choice, you gotta have a medium heavy at minimum, because you don't know what size you're gonna catch, especially if you know the opportunity to catch a bigger one is there. Generally, I'll start off with a 7-foot. This is the Terramar PX, so very affordable rod. Here's the model number. I'm gonna take the bait off. You can look right there and get all the details. All right, and then maybe the guys will end up putting some details here in the description below, but it's a medium heavy 7-foot Terramar PX, and it has quite the tip. It only bends in that last 20% of the rod. So it is a very fast action rod, and you're going to need it because remember, you're going to try to drive a giant hook. That's a big hook right there. So it's got some girth. It's a heavy gauge hook, and you're going to need it because you're going to be pulling hard. These fish run hard, they jump. So it's not small fish time, it's big fish time. Even when you're using the Mirrolure on the XL and XXL versions, the 27 and the 37, you'll notice how beefy and thick those hooks are. So you're going to need a rod that can drive that. You do not want to fish for shallow water cobia with a medium action rod. So that's the whole reason for having that big, heavy, weight forward 1/4 ounce. So this rod throws everything from a 1/2 ounce pretty well, all the way up to 1.5 ounces. The Mirrolure is a little over a 1/2 ounce. This one is probably 9/16. If you throw the 37 MR, you're probably looking at closer to 3/4 ounce, which is in the sweet spot for this rod. This is a 1/4 ounce snake locks, but I can tell you when I weighed it with the plastic and everything attached to it, it is over a 1/2 ounce. It really is. It's probably about the same weight as this 27 MR. So this is perfect for this setup. Now, I like to use something that's got a lot of drag, okay, and very smooth, because the first run is amazing how hard they run and fast and jump, and I mean, they burn it up. So I'm using, okay, you're gonna have to read it upside down, but I'm using the Twin Power. This is the Twin Power XD 4000. I love the power handle on this reel. It is the smoothest. To me, it's better than having a Stella. And I know not everyone wants to spend $400 or $500 on a reel, but this Twin Power 4000, I even tarpon fish in some zones with these reels because they're that good, but they're super light. They don't weigh nothing. And I can cast all day. That's why in a lot of the videos you see me throwing casting gear, because I'm throwing all day long and I want something that's not going to fatigue me. Well, I have found that if you're going to have to throw spinning gear, this is the ideal one to throw. So this is the perfect setup for me. This is what I like to use. 7-foot medium heavy, extra fast rod, 4,000 size reel. You could even throw a 5,000, but that's just a lot of weight. This 4,000 does a good job. The braid that I'm using this is Power Pro Super Slick V2. This is in the 15-pound class, but oftentimes, like my second rod over there, I have rigged with 10-pound if I have to cast a little bit farther with a lighter bait. And then the leader itself, you'll notice I've got a bimini twist here. So I've got about an 8-inch bimini twist, and then I've got the same knot that I use for tarpon fishing, which is the no-name knot. It's a 12-turn knot, and it's strong enough to catch tarpon. It's pretty doggone strong enough to catch cobia. And I have about 4.5 feet of 40-pound leader, which in many cases 40 pound is kind of a little overkill, but I want to make sure if the cobia of my lifetime swims by in 3 feet of water, that I'm going to land it for sure. Because many times this is kind of tough, boring fishing where you got to spend a lot of time looking for these fish and you only catch 1 or 2. But I want to be able to do this in my skiff and have enough line capacity and a rod that will serve me well. So I'm by myself. I solo fish for these things all the time because it's tough to take clients on them, just because you got to have the patience of Job to get this done. So that's basically my rod and reel setup, and that's it. We're going to wrap up right after I put this back in the rack. Well, I'm kind of hoping that I've opened your eyes to some major possibilities this spring and late spring before we get into tarpon season about catching cobia in shallow water. Between sharing the tackle requirements and sharing a little bit of the how-to and what to look for, you know, that's what my job is here at FlatsClass YouTube, is to make you a better angler. Hey, besides the blistering runs and impressive photos like this one here, I mean, they taste pretty good. I mean, they look good on your pellet grill or on your fire disc. So it's a fish worthwhile chasing before tarpon season gets here and breaks the monotony of just going red fishing all the time. All right, if you like what you see here, give us the thumbs up, subscribe, tell your friends. I want to be your saltwater inshore authority moving forward. Until next time, Captain C.A. Richardson signing off from FlatsClass YouTube.